So you want to know about Balerion the Black Dread? Well, buckle up because this dragon's story is absolutely wild. We're talking about a creature so massive that his shadow could literally cover entire towns when he flew overhead. His teeth were the size of swords, and he could swallow a full-grown cow in one bite. But here's the thing that makes Balerion truly special. He's the only living creature in Westeros history to have seen Old Valyria before the Doom destroyed it. Think about that for a second. This dragon witnessed the fall of the greatest civilization the world had ever known, and lived for over 200 years after that. Let's start at the very beginning, back when Valyria was still standing. Balerion was born in the Valyrian Freehold, named after one of the Old Valyrian gods. According to a prop book used in House of the Dragon, which is show canon, Balerion was claimed by Daenys Targaryen, also known as Daenys the Dreamer. Here's where things get interesting. The night before she had her famous prophetic dream about the doom of Valyria, she claimed Balerion, who at that time was no bigger than a horse. The very next night, she dreamed of the catastrophic volcanic eruption that would destroy the entire Valyrian peninsula 12 years later. Because of Daenys' dream, her father, Aegon Targaryen, did something that everyone else thought was completely insane. He sold everything the family owned in Valyria and packed up 5 dragons to move to this little volcanic island called Dragonstone off the coast of Westeros. The other Dragonlord families laughed at him. They thought the Targaryens were cowards and weaklings. But guess what? 12 years later, the Doom hit, and every single one of those families and their dragons were wiped out in one of the most catastrophic events in history. The Targaryens and their 5 dragons were the only dragon lords to survive. Here's something that really puts Balerion's age into perspective. Of those 5 dragons that made it to Dragonstone, Balerion was the only one who survived long enough to see Aegon's conquest. The other 4 died over the years, but they left eggs behind that hatched into Varga and Meraxes. So by the time Aegon the Conqueror decided to take over Westeros, Balerion was already over 100 years old and absolutely enormous. Now let's talk about Aegon's conquest, because this is where Balerion really earned his title as the Black Dread. Aegon wasn't just some random Targaryen. He had a prophetic dream, similar to his ancestor Daenys, about the White Walkers and the long night that would eventually threaten Westeros. He believed the only way humanity could survive was if the 7 kingdoms were united under one ruler. So in the year 1 AC, which stands for after Conquest because this event literally reset the calendar, Aegon landed at what would become King's Landing with his 2 sister wives, Visenya and Rhaenys, and their 3 dragons. Balerion's appearance alone was enough to make grown men soar themselves. His scales and wings were pure black, darker than midnight. But here's the really unsettling part. His fire was black too, sometimes with swirls of red running through it. When Balerion unleashed his flames in their full power, they could melt steel and stone, and even fuse sand into glass. His wingspan was so vast that entire towns would be plunged into shadow when he flew over them. Imagine living in a medieval village, and suddenly the sun disappears because a dragon the size of a jumbo jet just flew overhead. Terrifying doesn't even begin to cover it. The first major display of Balerion's power came before Aegon even invaded Westeros. Some magistas from Pentos and Tyrosh were having trouble with Volantis and asked for Aegon's help. Aegon took Balerion and burned down the entire Volantine fleet, just like that. 1 dragon, 1 afternoon, and an entire naval fleet was gone. That should have been a warning to the kings of Westeros about what was coming, but pride is a funny thing. The conquest of the Riverlands showed everyone exactly what Balerion could do. King Harren the Black, an Ironborn ruler who controlled the Riverlands, had just finished building Harrenhal, the largest and most formidable castle ever constructed in Westeros. It had the tallest towers, the strongest walls, and Harren genuinely believed nothing could touch him there. When Aegon demanded that he surrender, Harren refused and locked himself in the tallest tower of Harrenhal with his sons. He thought the stone walls would protect him from dragonfire. He was very, very wrong. Under the cover of darkness, Aegon flew Balerion high into the night sky, so high that even Harrenhal looked tiny below them. Then they dove straight down into the castle, well inside the guarded walls. Balerion opened his mouth and bathed all 5 towers in his black flames. Now here's the thing, the stone didn't burn in the traditional sense. Instead, Balerion's fire was so incredibly hot that it made the stone itself glow white-hot. The towers began to melt and twist like candles. Harrenhal essentially became the world's biggest oven, baking Harren and his entire family alive inside their own fortress. To this day, the towers of Harrenhal remain twisted and melted, a permanent reminder of what happened there. In the show Game of Thrones, Tywin Lannister tells this story to Arya Stark, and you can see the fear in his eyes when he talks about it, even hundreds of years later. Then came the Field of Fire, which was basically the final nail in the coffin for anyone who thought they could resist the Targaryens. King Mern of the Reach and King Lauren of the Rock had joined forces, creating the largest army ever assembled in Westeros. They had around 60,000 men ready to face Aegon and his sisters. The Targaryen forces were massively outnumbered, so the two kings probably thought they had this in the bag. They positioned their army on a large, dry field of wheat, which turned out to be the worst tactical decision in history. Aegon, Visenya and Rhaenys attacked together on Balerion, Varga and Meraxes. The three dragons set the entire wheat field on fire. The flames created a massive upwind that swept through the enemy army, and 4,000 men were burned to death, cooked alive inside their own armor. King Mern and all of his sons died in the fire, completely wiping out House Gardner. King Lauren was smart enough to surrender immediately after that and bend the knee to Aegon. And that's how Balerion, along with his two dragon siblings, essentially ended the war in one afternoon. After the conquest, Balerion's fire served one more crucial purpose. All the swords from Aegon's defeated enemies were melted down, and it was Balerion's flames that forged them into the Iron Throne. Think about that symbolism. The throne that ruled Westeros for 300 years was literally created by the breath of the Black Dread. In a way, Balerion's power and terror were baked into the very seat of power in King's Landing. Aegon died in 37 AC, and Balerion passed to his second son, Maegor. Now, Maegor is a whole different story. This guy was so brutal that history remembers him as Maegor the Cruel, and that's not a title you earn by being nice. As a young man, Maegor had refused to claim any of the other dragons on Dragonstone because he believed none of them were worthy of him. He was specifically waiting for Balerion to become available because he felt he deserved nothing less than the greatest dragon in the world. That takes some serious arrogance, but it also shows you how prestigious Balerion was. Claiming this dragon wasn't just about power, it was about legitimacy and status. Maegor's reign was a bloodbath, and Balerion was right there with him for all of it. When the Faith militant rose up against Maegor because of his multiple marriages, which the Faith considered an abomination, Maegor and Balerion responded by burning them all. The Sept of Remembrance, which served as headquarters for the warrior sons in King's Landing, was burned to the ground with 700 warrior sons inside it during their morning prayers. The screams of the dying men could be heard throughout the entire city, and a pall of smoke hung in the air for days. This is the kind of terror that Balerion helped Maegor spread across the realm. The most significant battle during Maegor's reign was the battle beneath the God's Eye in 43 AC. Maegor's nephew, Aegon the Uncrowned, was challenging him for the throne, riding a dragon named Quicksilver. Now, Quicksilver was a decent-sized dragon, but compared to Balerion, not even close. The battle was over almost as soon as it began. Balerion tore Quicksilver apart midair, killing both the dragon and Aegon. This was the first time we saw Balerion fight another dragon, and it made one thing crystal clear: nothing could challenge the Black Dread in combat. When Maegor died in 48 AC under mysterious circumstances, found dead on the Iron Throne with multiple wounds, Balerion returned to Dragonstone to await a new rider. After Maegor's death, Balerion remained riderless for several years. Then in 54 AC, something happened that would lead to one of the most disturbing and mysterious events in all of Targaryen history. Princess Aerea Targaryen, a 12-year-old girl who was the daughter of Aegon the Uncrowned, claimed Balerion and disappeared. Just vanished. King Jaehaerys sent out expeditions to find them, and a huge reward was offered for any information, but nobody could find them anywhere. And this is Balerion we're talking about, the largest dragon in the world. How do you hide something that size? Septon Barth, who was the king's hand at the time, believed that the lack of sightings meant they had left Westeros entirely. For over a year, nobody knew where Aerea and Balerion were. When they finally returned to King's Landing in 56 AC, Aerea barely managed to cling to Balerion as he descended into the courtyard of the Red Keep. What happened next is something straight out of a horror movie. Aerea was severely ill with a fever so intense that the knight who carried her could feel the heat through his armor. But that wasn't even the worst part. According to the account written by Septon Barth, who was one of only 2 witnesses to her death, something was moving inside her body. They tried everything to save her, but nothing worked. In desperation, they lowered her into a tub of ice-cold water to try to cool the fever. That's when things got truly nightmarish. Slimy, unspeakable creatures began emerging from under her skin, making horrible sounds. One of them was as long as a man's arm. These things were described as creatures of heat and fire, and they died from the cold of the ice, but it was too late for Aerea. The princess died shortly after, and the official story told to the realm was that she died of a fever, which was technically true but left out all the horrifying details. Balerion himself was wounded when he returned. He had a massive jagged gash down his left side, almost 9 feet long, and it was still bleeding fresh, hot, smoking blood. Remember, this is the same dragon that tore Quicksilver apart like tissue paper. Whatever wounded Balerion must have been incredibly powerful and dangerous. The question everyone asked was, where had they been? Septon Barth came up with a theory that has dominated discussions ever since. He believed that Balerion, not Aerea, had chosen their destination. As the only living creature in the world that had known Valyria before the Doom, Balerion had returned home. Think about that. The dragon was homesick. He went back to the place where he was born, taking this young girl with him because she wasn't experienced enough to control him. What they found there in the ruins of Valyria can only be imagined, but it was clearly horrific beyond measure. Old Valyria was known for its powerful sorcerers who practiced blood magic and created all sorts of hybrid creatures through genetic manipulation. After the Doom, these abominations likely roamed the ruins without restriction. The theory is that these parasitic creatures found their way inside Aerea, either because she was forced to scavenge for food and water, or they actively infected her. As for what wounded Balerion, ancient legends spoke of massive fireworms that lived in the volcanoes near Valyria. If they survived the Doom, they would have been more than capable of injuring even the Black Dread and forcing him to flee. The aftermath of this tragedy led to major changes in Westeros. King Jaehaerys was so disturbed by what happened that he issued an edict forbidding any ship suspected of having visited Valyria or sailed through the Smoking Sea from landing in any port in the realm. Any Westerosi who attempted to travel to Valyria would be executed. Balerion was placed in the newly completed Dragon Pit, becoming the first dragon to be housed there, and the Order of Dragon Keepers was formed to make sure no one could steal a dragon again. Aerea's mother, Queen Rhaena, refused to let her daughter's ashes be buried on Dragonstone, saying that Aerea had hated it there and had wanted to fly. So Rhaena scattered her ashes to the wind from the back of her dragon Dreamfire, honoring her daughter's wish for freedom. Balerion lived for nearly 40 more years after Aerea's death, but he was never quite the same. The dragon that had terrified the Seven Kingdoms, that had burned Harrenhal and forged the Iron Throne, grew old and slow. In 93 AC, Prince Viserys Targaryen, who would later become King Viserys I, claimed Balerion as his mount. By this point, Balerion was over 200 years old, and it showed. The dragon was hard to rouse from sleep, and when Viserys finally got him into the air, Balerion struggled. They managed to fly around King's Landing 3 times. But Viserys had originally planned to fly to Dragonstone. He quickly realized that Balerion didn't have the strength for it anymore, and turned back. Less than a year later, in 94 AC, Balerion died of old age. He simply went to sleep one day and never woke up. This made him unique in Targaryen history because he's the only dragon known to have died of natural causes. Every other dragon died in battle, from disease, or from the toxic environment during the Dance of the Dragons. But Balerion, he lived his full life, saw the rise and fall of civilizations, served multiple riders, fought wars, and ultimately died peacefully. For a creature that spread so much death and destruction, it's almost poetic that he got to die on his own terms. After his death, Balerion's skull was displayed in the throne room of the Red Keep, alongside the skulls of 18 other Targaryen dragons. His skull was by far the largest, dwarfing even Varga's. In the books, there's a scene where Tyrion Lannister sees the skulls in the cellars of the Red Keep after Robert Baratheon had them moved, and he describes Balerion's skull as being massive, with teeth the size of swords. In Game of Thrones Season 1, Arya Stark encounters the skull while exploring the Red Keep, and in Season 7, Qyburn uses it as a target to test his Scorpion Ballista, proving that dragons aren't invincible. Now let's talk about Balerion's size because this is something people are always curious about. How big was he really? The descriptions in the books and show are consistent. His shadow could engulf entire towns, his teeth were as long as swords, and he could swallow an aurochs whole. An aurochs, by the way, is an extinct species of wild cattle that was about 6 feet tall at the shoulder. Balerion could eat one in a single gulp. His jaws were large enough to swallow a mammoth, and one account mentions he could swallow a hairy elephant, which suggests his mouth was absolutely enormous. When you compare Balerion to other dragons, the size difference becomes even more impressive. During the Dance of the Dragons, Varga was the largest living dragon, and her body core was said to be about 5 times larger than a warhorse. Balerion was bigger than that. If you've watched House of the Dragon and seen how massive Varga is, making dragons like Caraxes and Syrax look tiny by comparison, Balerion was even larger. To put it in modern terms, Balerion was probably about the size of a jumbo jet, maybe even bigger, with a wingspan that would make a Boeing 747 look small. And what about Drogon from Game of Thrones? A lot of people have speculated that Drogon is Balerion reborn, especially since the Dothraki called him that. Drogon does share Balerion's black coloring and red eyes, and he was certainly the largest and most aggressive of Daenerys' 3 dragons. However, when you compare Drogon's size at the end of Game of Thrones to Balerion's skull in the Red Keep, it's clear that Balerion was at least twice as big, possibly more. Drogon was only about 7 years old by the end of the series, while Balerion lived for over 2 centuries. Dragons never stop growing as long as they have food and freedom, so if Drogon lives as long as Balerion did, he might eventually match or even exceed the Black Dread size. but as it stands, Balerion remains the largest dragon in known history. There's a lot of symbolism surrounding Balerion that's worth mentioning. In the books and show, 3 of Balerion's confirmed dragon riders, Daenys the Dreamer, Aegon the Conqueror, and Viserys I, were all dragon dreamers, people who had prophetic visions. Daenys foresaw the doom of Valyria, Aegon dreamed of the White Walkers and the Long Night, and Viserys likely had similar visions given his family's history. The fact that Balerion bonded with multiple people who had prophetic abilities suggests there might have been something deeper connecting them, some shared power or destiny that we don't fully understand. When Viserys claimed Balerion in 93 AC, it wasn't just about having a dragon, it was a political move. At that time, there was a dispute over the succession to the Iron Throne. Viserys' father Balon had been named heir by King Jaehaerys, but this decision passed over Princess Rhaenys, who many believed had a better claim. By claiming Balerion, Viserys was making a statement. He was showing that he was worthy, that the greatest dragon in history accepted him as a rider. In Westerosi culture, whoever rode Balerion was considered a true Targaryen, and some people even believed that person was fit to be king. This symbolic power likely helped Viserys when the Great Council of 101 AC was held to decide the succession after his father Balon died suddenly. Interestingly, after Balerion died, Viserys never claimed another dragon. He could have. There were plenty of dragons available during his reign, but he chose not to, and there are a few possible reasons for this. First, it showed respect for Balerion, honoring the memory of the greatest dragon. Second, it held onto that symbolic power of being Balerion's last rider. However, this decision also had consequences. During his reign, Viserys became dependent on other family members for military support in the air, which allowed people like his brother Daemon to act against his wishes, and ultimately contributed to the tensions that led to the Dance of the Dragons. One of the most intriguing aspects of Balerion's story is how it connects to the broader mythology of the series. The parallels between Daenerys and Aegon are striking. Aegon came to Westeros with 3 dragons to unite the 7 kingdoms, believing it was necessary for humanity's survival. Daenerys, his distant descendant, hatched 3 dragons from stone and eventually returned to Westeros for similar reasons. In the final episode of Game of Thrones, after Jon Snow kills Daenerys, Drogon melts the Iron Throne that Balerion's fire had forged. It's like the circle is complete. The throne was created by Balerion's flames and brought 300 years of conflict and bloodshed. Drogon, who resembles Balerion more than any other dragon, destroys it with his flames, ending the cycle. What makes Balerion's story so compelling is that it's not just about power and destruction. It's about loss, memory, and the price of survival. He was the last living link to Old Valyria, and when he died, the connection was severed forever. No dragon after him would know the world before the doom. No dragon after him would grow as large or live as long or inspire as much fear. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think Drogon could have eventually grown to match Balerion's size if he'd lived long enough? And here's the real question that keeps me up at night. What the hell did Balerion and Aerea encounter in the ruins of Old Valyria that was powerful enough to wound the Black Dread? Drop your theories in the comments because I love reading them, and some of you come up with stuff that blows my mind. If you made it this far, you're clearly as obsessed with dragon lore as I am, so do me a favor and smash that like button. It genuinely helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more deep dives like this. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss when I cover other legendary dragons like Varga, Caraxes, or even the wild story of the cannibal, the mysterious wild dragon on Dragonstone that ate other dragons. I've got tons more House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones content coming your way, breaking down the histories, the battles, the prophecies, and all the crazy stuff George R.R. Martin packed into this universe. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.